guys, welcome to another episode of Funky Marketing Show. On this episode, we're going to talk about a very specific and great topic that we don't talk about that much. Fortunately, we should have how to use original research in your content marketing programs to generate more authority and leads. And I have the right person for that. Her name is Becky Lawlor. She's a founder and chief research and content officer at RedPoint. And what I like the most is that she has working with a lot of different companies like Adobe, Samsung, IBM, Zapier, and basically partnering up with them to help them elevate their marketing presence and brand recognition through creating original research and basically the insights that will create the authority. So without further introduction, join me in welcoming Becky to the show.
Thanks, everyone. I'm excited to be here.
Excited to have you here as well. Did I miss something in that intro?
No, I think that's a good intro. I come from a foundation content creation and creating thought leadership content. And that's how I moved into original research, as I felt like it was the best vehicle to really elevate brands' thought leadership.
Yeah, sounds great. What I see more and more, especially working with tech companies, is that a lot of them don't have the bandwidth inside the companies to create entertaining content. Meaning a lot of engineers in the leadership positions, those kind of things, and it makes it hard for them to go and like record the podcast or create like TikTok videos or similar things now work on YouTube, right? From that perspective. And what I see, what might be a great resource for them, and one of the content pillars, maybe the content pillar, is the research and basically partnering up also with some of the companies that they integrate with, and that it comes naturally for them to cooperate with those companies. So am I wrong or no?
No, you're absolutely right. It's interesting you say that because I'm just working on a case study now with a client that I just finished up with, and one of their big motivators they wanted to really bring a thought leadership program to market in content. But when they were thinking about how to do that, one of their challenges was that the executive team, their subject matter experts, essentially, that they wanted to elevate to as thought leaders within the company, had very little time or bandwidth to actually participate. So as you said, doing things like getting them on interviews and even just interviewing them internally for content was going to be a challenge because they just didn't have the time. So what they had decided to do was actually to do this kind of research-based project where it wouldn't actually lean on the executive team or these thought leaders that they wanted to elevate, but the outcome of the project gave the executive team all of this data that they can then, when they had like they have like an annual event that all the executive team speaks at, every single one of them incorporated the data into their speeches and talks. And in fact, the executive team kind of was like a little pushback in the initial of like, I don't know if this is the right project. But when they saw it all done and the data was there and everything, they were like, wow, this is amazing. We want to double the investment in the size of this for next year because it's so impactful. So to that point, like, even it is a great way to just develop thought leadership when the internal bandwidth is very limited.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they basically have the data to be able to use it to tell their stories from that perspective and develop different types of content from that.
Yeah. And, I think the other thing is just doing this type of research really elevates your brand as a whole as being willing to invest in doing research for the industry. So you become an industry authority simply because you're the one out there investing in better understanding the industry and helping others better understand the industry.
Yeah, I think that's very overlooked thing. So when we talk about building authorities and those kind of things, usually we come up with, let the founder write a book or write a content, on LinkedIn as much as possible. So if people can see you, you can jump out of pata on LinkedIn and everybody will remember you, right? But if you actually do the research, I think it also leads to not only subjective, but objective elements that why you have the authority in the field. Because you actually become the resource for the others through that.
Correct.
At least that's how I see it.
Yeah, if you think about like big examples like Salesforce. Everybody knows about Salesforce, like state of marketing report that comes out every year, right? And that, to your point, also like, if a founder writes a book, it does, they're connected to the brand. So it gives the brand a little more authority, but it's really giving the founder authority. If you really want to look at, as a marketer, your responsibility is the brand authority and the brand awareness. And so when you're doing branded original research, that's building it for the brand, not for a particular thought leader. And in the example I just gave in the past, it still wasn't for a particular thought leader, but the data could kind of be shared for each thought leader's kind of area of expertise, because we did a broad and deep survey. So there was data that each person could kind of pull out and say, hey, this correlates to what I, know and talk about. But again, you're kind of building an umbrella of brand authority and awareness.
Yeah, so let's maybe dig a little bit more deeper into that before we talk about actually how do we do the research and those kind of things. Maybe how do we actually sell to the leadership that we need to do the original research, right? I think that might be, from marketer standpoint, might somebody when they need additional advice.
Yeah, I think it can be challenging because I'm going to be honest that, doing research it can be more expensive and it takes some time to do. It's not simple as whipping out a blog post or something. But I think if you, as the marketer, like in the example I was just talking about with that client, the CMO was really bought on that this was the right thing to do, that there were, she felt like there was a gap in research in the industry. They had an opportunity to step up in the industry. They had an opportunity to really build their thought leadership. And she just kind of went to battle for it, honestly. And she said afterwards, she was chatting with the CEO and he was, kind of saying, remember like how hard that was to get through. And now everybody's glad so there is, if you really believe in it, you may have to really kind of champion it and push for it. The other way I would say you could do this is start small, kind of a quick win thing. So instead of going like in a broad, deep one, like I also do kind of what I call pulse surveys. Maybe it's just a short 10-question survey. It's not as deep and as big, and it won't give you kind of like as much analysis and foundation, but sometimes you can use a smaller piece, a short survey, just getting something that's original data out there and putting it in content and seeing how it performs. And then when you can show that it's getting a lot higher engagement than some of your other pieces of content, then maybe you can get the buy-in for a bigger budget and a bigger, more in-depth project.
Yes, that sounds good. Sometimes you need to start smaller and to show, the value of those things to be able to actually negotiate the bigger things.
Yes.
I think we often forget that, especially, us marketers, we like big shiny things. And so like, let's go and do the big research. Let's go. And then they say, okay, we don't have the budget for that.
Yeah. And if you don't have any, but you can do it internally. I think there are challenges. One, like, understanding the whole process. And like, I just talked to somebody yesterday who, they did do it internally themselves last year, but they're looking to use a vendor this year because it was a lot of internal time and bandwidth. And, there were just some struggles in patching every piece of it together. And, but that's not to say you can't do it. And again, so if you don't have the budget, even if you'd love to take it off your plate or you don't fully have the expertise, again, giving it a try, doing what you can do, getting something across the finish line better than nothing at all. And then, that's what marketers do, right? We iterate. So whether you kind of improve the process internally and get better and figure out how to do it better, or you get the buy-in so you can, use somebody who can really help you with that process. Either way, you're moving the ball forward.
Yeah, that's also well said. We need to ship out things, no matter how small they are. We need to make something happen. But tell me now that we kind of show them how they can actually get the approval for that. How do we choose the topic of the research? That might seem overwhelming for some of the companies, especially like the small ones. Like we are small. For example, we look at Zapier. Like they can integrate with so many different tools and elements. And where should we start with?
Yeah. So, even Zapier, the ones I've worked on with them, a lot of times like we did one that was really around, this was kind of when this was I think 2 years ago. So kind of when there was concerns that a recession was coming, but nobody knew. So so it wasn't necessarily even tied directly to their product. It was around how are, companies feeling, how are CEOs and startups and in the tech world feeling about a recession? Are they worried? How is it impacting them? What are they doing right now? So the first point is you need to understand what your goals are for the project. We talked about authority and brand awareness. If those are your top goals and you're looking to get like media mentions and that kind of thing, then you want to be thinking about like, what publications do we want to be in? What does the press in our space care about? What are they talking about? What are the trends that they're going to pick up? If your top goal is lead gen, because we didn't talk about this yet, but lead gen is a really great way to use research. It does get more engagement typically than other types of content. People just, it's new, it's interesting. People want to know what their peers are saying, so that's another one. And if lead gen is, you want to create a report that's really going to drive leads to your pipeline, then you want to be thinking about what is a topic that's going to engage that audience I'm trying to reach. What do I want to survey around that? And you can have both of those goals in tandem. Typically, most of my clients have those two top goals in mind. And so we might prioritize one, but we're kind of thinking about both. So that will help you set what should the topic be. And then you want to do some competitive analysis. You want to make sure you still have a unique angle, that somebody hasn't done something similar, that you're asking questions that are different and you're coming up with a different story and narrative. Another great thing to do is think about like myths in your industry. What could you bust out there that would really be kind of like a headliner, both for your audience or the press, right? Like if everybody thinks X is true, but you, from your own internal experience, have kind of said, this is sort of the myth out there, but everything that we know about our customers and when we're talking to people, we actually think Y is true and we'd like to test this hypothesis. That can be, if you come back that you're correct, then you have a great kind of headline that really engages people. So
Yeah, I love those things, and I'm thinking about lead gen because my background is in agency work, in performance,
yeah,
startups as well, but and before that is in youth work and informal education. And I'm always thinking what companies usually do is when they think of lead gen, let's come up with one pager. Let's come up with like 10 advice for somebody, like no effort, and we want to get everything from the customers, right? And instead, if we use the research over there and actually give them some specific data on a specific thing that they care about, of course they're going to give us the information. That's like
yeah,
kind of non-negotiable from that standpoint.
I think these days, like when you talk about, gated content and stuff, I think most people feel there's very few things that they're going to give their email over for at this point, and certainly more than their email if you're asking other detailed questions. But I think that original research has proven to still be one piece of content that people are willing to provide information to get the content for.
Totally agree. And you got me thinking, what did I do last time I was checking? I think it was, I don't know, it was Databox or something or some other company, but they had a research and I was going through it and basically I downloaded it from my phone. I took the screenshots and I uploaded each slide to my Instagram stories and basically wrote comments, like notes and draw on that. And I took that, created a PDF and uploaded it on LinkedIn. So kind of like I reused it as my content from that perspective. Tag the company, tag other people, and I'm looking like it came so naturally to me, right? Because they were talking from both perspectives that I found interesting and insightful and relevant for me. So and like that's only me, right? If you do the research,
Right.
you involve a lot of other people, so it instantly starts bringing you not only the authority but also the awareness, and people
Yeah.
start talking about it, and it goes. And I think it's especially relevant, like you mentioned the Zapier example. If we got the topic right, and it's the topic that people care about deeply, with emotions, with those kind of things. I mean, sure, we can be add a little bit of controversy, but usually the data will get us the controversy if there is someone.
Yeah, and I think to your point, another great use of research is I don't usually make it one of the top goals, but I feel like a nice add-on is backlinks. It actually can serve in your SEO because people start to link back to your data points in their own posts. So you start to get backlinks back to your content. And like you said, social shares and other ways that the content surfaces that just further builds your brand awareness.
Yeah, so tell me, how much work does it actually gets into doing the research? I think that's something that a lot of people think that's sure there's a hard work, but let's kind of uncover how much of work is there. I mean, from my perspective, usually it's actually getting people to answer the questions or to get the answers. That's the most difficult part, and that's where the most energy goes.
Yeah, so there's a couple things. One, I think actually getting the survey right is the most critical piece. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
yeah, you have to have the audience to answer it, but I'll kind of go into how to get your audience. But if you don't, a lot of people, I also think that this is kind of a misnomer out there, like, oh, I'll just whip up a survey. But if the survey isn't done right, and there's a whole bunch of done rights by, I mean, both the quality and making sure that you're asking questions in a way to ensure you're getting the right people responding. Because if you're just getting Joe Schmo out there, he may have clicked through and answered all your questions, but now you don't even know if your data is valid, right? Because you don't actually know who is really responding to it and that they really fit your ideal, profile. So you need to have a way to kind of make sure you're screening whether you kick them out at the front if they're not right or you clean the data at the back. You need to have a way to know that these are the right people and that you're going to just keep the data that's valid and is people that really could answer these questions accurately. And then there's also the way you need to, I've seen people just where like everybody in the organization is kind of like, oh, I have 3 questions I want to ask and I have 3 questions and let's put all these together. So you have all these data points, but you don't have a story. And if your goal here is content at the end of the day, you need to have a narrative, and your survey needs to actually create that narrative. So you need to be thinking about that right from the get-go. Your questions need to drive that narrative. They need to also be thinking about messaging and headlines and how you're going to do that in content so that the way the questions are phrased, the type of question structure that you use. So just the survey design is important. A lot of people don't really think about it that much. And I just want to really emphasize that you actually should really be thinking about your survey design, because you can, I've seen it over and over actually, where people spend all this time and investment and they do get the audience and they get the answers, but there's nothing meaningful or interesting to say from the data because of the way the survey was structured. As far as getting the audience, you have a couple of options. If you have an email list, you can go that route, but I will say you have to have a significant enough email list. The typical response rate is 1% to 2%. If you have a really engaged email list and a topic that they're really passionate about and would want to respond to. And I think it also helps if you help in your emails out to them, like why they should respond, what they're going to get back from it. Like you're going to share the data back with them, and this is something they would care about. Then I've seen it, you can get 5, 10, maybe even 20% if you're like really engaged, but you shouldn't think that, oh, I have an email list of X number and I'm going to get, 50, 60 people percent to respond to this. That's probably not going to happen. So you just kind of have to go in knowing what reality kind of looks like using that and do the math to think like, if we only got 5% of this email list response, is that enough responses? Is that going to work for us? You can also share it out on community like social or like through associations if you have industry associations and things like that. When you do it on social, that's the one I really like. So you got to be careful because you're going to probably just start getting a lot of fraud that you're going to have to, and bots that you're going to have to clean out. So it's not my preferred method at all, but it is an option. The other way, which I do with a lot of my clients, is there are B2B professional panels out there, and they have actually vetted and sourced these different, categories of B2B professionals. You do have to pay per response, and it can vary, and it does require some budget, but they will guarantee the number of responses. I mean, they have their own feasibility calculations, and they'll come back and tell you, like, we can get X number, or and we can meet these qualifiers. So I can say like, look, I want to survey an IT audience. They need to have a director above position. They need to be at companies with 500 million in revenue and more, and they need to have a role in IT security or whatever. So I can kind of give very narrow parameters. Obviously, the more narrow your parameters are, the more expensive it becomes. But it is a way that allows you to really narrow in on the very specific profile you have and kind of know that you're going to be able to get that audience if you can find a vendor that can serve that audience. So that's the final way, and that does take time of reaching out to vendors and knowing who, at this point for myself, I have a long list of vendors and I kind of know like, oh, this client needs this. I know which 3 vendors I'm going to go ask for this audience, So there's that process. Then you need to program the survey in some sort of programming software. You'll need to get it into the field, whether that's email or through a panel vendor. It typically is in the field 2 to 3 weeks. Then you've got the data cleaning and analysis. And this is where I highly recommend that, so you're going to come out with your 20, 30 questions and the stats, but the real value of your research is often in what's called cross-tabbing, or how you splice that data. So taking like your demographics and maybe looking at like, how did different industries respond? How did different roles respond? Did the CEO group respond differently than the individual contributors? Is there an interesting story about how they don't see eye to eye? They think, the C-suite thinks everything's great and the contributors down here struggling. And so that's where you really get and can uncover a lot of hidden kind of stories and ideas and insights. So it's important to either work with a vendor or a data analyst that can really go deeper than just like, here's your data set of the 20, 30 questions, here's the responses. Because otherwise you're kind of, again, missing, I think, getting the full maximum value of the investment that you've just made.
Basically you get back to being a normal IT company that doesn't know what to do with this data. Yeah, but thanks for reminding all of us for the, as you see, I know about customer research, but I still miss that part, the importance of how do we actually create the survey and which questions are we asking and what goes into that, because we don't want anybody to answer the questions. We want the right questions for the right audience. And that brings us also to the second point, which is how do we find those people? How do we actually distribute it to that? And I just want to kind of remind people what you say. It's not the easiest way is if you have an email newsletter, so you can reach out to those people, already people that are familiar with your brand and what do you do from that standpoint. Then, proven vendors that that can give to that. And only then you go to the social and other platforms when you can get additional people to fill in the survey. And then we come back again to the data and how we actually translate that.
Yeah, and I do want to go back to one point you made on a survey. Again, it's also important to know like a market research survey and how that's written is different than the type of survey that I'm doing where the content is the goal, because you have a different certain types of questions. And I just say this because I've seen this actually happen where clients have gone to a market research firm, but their goal is content, and then the survey, these folks actually, they have survey design experience, but they're thinking about it from a market research perspective. And so then actually, again, I've unfortunately seen where it doesn't translate really well into being the right kind of survey questions for the content goal. So you really need to know what your goal is and make sure that the vendor that you use has the expertise for that type of research that you're doing.
Yeah, great. Thanks for correcting me for that. And it's important distinction to say, because both of them are done for different reasons and with a different goal in mind.
Just like, I'm not a market researcher, so I don't think I would be an expert at designing a survey for market research, right? So
Yeah. That's important. That's important to say. So maybe we can go through a couple of examples. What can be the outcome of the research, and what does it mean? So we can make it closer to everybody listening.
Yeah, so I have a couple I had one client, they've just had tremendous success. They're actually in the manufacturing space. They actually produce testing equipment for food packaging and consumer goods packaging manufacturers, so to quality control test their packaging. But the first one we did was on sustainable packaging, and this again goes to getting your research topic right. So there's a ton of consumer based research out there about, like, what kinds of sustainable packaging do consumers want, how important is it to them, and what they'll buy. But there was very limited research around, like, the challenges that manufacturers themselves are dealing with in, like, we have to use all these new materials. How do we, test that they work properly, that we can put them out there, that they're going to, like, protect the food and keep it good, and and how do we supply chain and getting it, and all these things that really were manufactured centered challenges. There was very limited research on that. So that's the angle that we went with. And, they just had incredible results from it. They had 80 plus media mentions from it. They got in front of, an estimated 2.5 million readers, which they, doing the math, they estimated was about $255,000 worth of free advertising just from the media that they got from it. Additionally, as far as campaigns went, they saw 2 to 3 times the leads generated from any other campaign any other type of content campaign they'd run with their report. And then one that I hadn't even really thought about or expected, they said in previous years, they had applied to, like, a couple of trade shows that they really wanted to have their thought leaders speak at, and been not gotten the speaking engagements. So when they had this research, they applied. Not only did they get the speaking engagements, they got prime speaking spots at these trade shows. And they've done numerous trade shows, this year, and we did it again the next year, from both of those, because they had data and research to present at the trade show. It just elevated them so much. So it really did. And in fact, I love this one too. Like, Gartner actually even cited their research in one of their blogs. So it's like, okay, you've made it. Gartner is now citing your research. So that means you've established some authority out there. So it was a really successful endeavor for them, and which is why they continued to invest in it. So that's one example. I think a really strong one. Getting, if you get the angle right and you find a place where there's a gap, you can be really successful. I also have a client who's they had been doing, and this one I'm going to share, goes back to the point of why you need to make sure your survey and everything is right. They'd been doing a year-over-year annual kind of state of IT ops type survey, and they'd been using a previous vendor, I think, for 3 years, but they were kind of like, meh, let's look around. And so when they switched to me, one of the things they said at the end of the project was, well, the result was this. I checked back with them a month after they had released the report that I worked on with them, and they said, we've generated 3 times the leads in 1 month than we generated all of last year with our previous report. Boom. So then we dug into, like, wow, why? And they said one of the things is they felt like they were using an agency previously that had expertise in tech, but not necessarily, and content marketing, but didn't actually have the research tech. So they said, they're actually leaning on us for the survey design. We're not survey design experts. So it was kind of like they were co-creating the survey without either of them really knowing what the best practices were and how to do that. And so the result was they didn't have as strong of a report. They didn't have as strong of a narrative and as interesting of data. So having somebody come in that could really guide them through that survey, and it is still a collaborative process. Like, when I work with my clients, they need to participate because they have the insights into the audience, but I'm the one guiding and saying, like, well, let's structure the question this way, or let's ask it this way. Are we getting, and thinking about how is that going to translate out? So you just want to make sure you have somebody in that role that's really thinking through that piece.
Exactly. I mean, that's the most crucial thing, right? You have the framework. You know how to collect the data, how to actually analyze the data. Whom do you need to serve to get the right data? Those things are crucial, right? But you need to partner up with them because they have the access to the audience on that part. I'm thinking about the company that I'm working with at the moment. They basically do language programming, and it's just coming out of my head. And as somebody who is in a small niche doing really technical things, like the whole blog, the whole content is very technical. The CEO is subject matter expert in the field, and one of the things that I was thinking, like, you need to do the research that goes along with that, because one thing to present technical blogs, technical content is through maybe infographics, but research will add to that and give them also the bandwidth to go and be present in the media, get PR exposure. Maybe CEO can get invites to be a guest on a podcast to talk about things, and so we might do something together.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, there's just so many ways to use it. And one of the things we haven't even really talked about here is I see, like, if you invest in one of these kind of what I call kind of these cornerstone research projects where you're really asking 20, 30, questions, you're getting pretty in depth, is that you can really use it as I see it as a foundation to your whole content marketing strategy, because you not only are you getting like this great, authority building, lead gen building piece of content out of it, you're actually asking your target audience typically. I mean, sometimes you're not, it depends what you're surveying. Like, you may survey somebody that's not the target audience for the thing, but they'll be interested. But typically you're surveying your target audience and you're asking them, like, what are your challenges? How are you dealing with this? And all of a sudden you now actually have actual data around what would be relevant content for them. So and now you have all these data points that you can weave into all of your content for like the year. So it can really help you generate, like you said, you can do infographics, blogs, webinars, speaking engagements, sales enablement. There's so many ways you can use the content from the research, but it can also help you set the strategy of what you should even be talking about and what you should be writing about with your audience.
Exactly. When I work with companies, usually, what I see a lot of marketers tell them when they ask, how do I get to the audience, the fastest way to my ideal customers? Usually they say, advertising. Right. But sometimes that's not the most clever way, and definitely the one that is, definitely not the one which is the most profitable in a way. It's expensive. And sometimes I go with podcast, definitely one way to do it, and creating a research with your customers is another one, because basically there is no better way to go to the market compared to creating content with your target audience and including them in the distribution.
Right. And, like customer interviews and like that are all really important. This is just another way to kind of round out that. I kind of, it's killing two birds with one stone. You have another goal, but you're getting more information back that will help inform your content strategy as well.
Yeah, sounds good. What did we miss? What didn't we talk about?
Well, I wanted to kind of just go back to audience for 1 minute, because one thing I didn't talk about that I think is a common question and concern is, like, how many responses do I need to make this valid?
Mm-hmm.
Because we talked about how hard it can be to get those responses. And so one thing I want to say is surveying a B2B audience is different from surveying a consumer audience, where like press and stuff, where they're going to expect you got 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, like consumers are easy to reach. But the narrower your audience is, the less of them that exist out there in the world, the smaller your sample size needs to be. So in my experience, typically for B2B, you do need to get over kind of like 100, 150 kind of threshold. That's usually where I say, like, that's kind of the minimum. But, I have seen even the Wall Street Journal publish like research that has 80 CMOs in it or something. So it can be, if you're really trying to go really high profile and they're large enterprises, a smaller sample size of 50 to 100 might even be appropriate. So you really need to understand who you're surveying, what your goals are, and what is appropriate for that. There's not like a one number that is right. You also need to, from that perspective, like if you want to do a global survey and you want to slice it by different geographic areas, or you want to use it in your ABM marketing, so you want to be able to splice it by 5 different industries and really kind of create separate reports for each industry, then you need to make sure that you're going to have enough in each of those buckets to be statistically valid. So that might mean if you're going to do a global one, you maybe need 500 in your audience, because now you want to separate 100 into each of your, kind of your EMEA and your APAC and your North America. So you need to make sure you've got enough kind of in each bucket. And again, this is where working with panels, or you can do this with your email too, is kind of setting quotas around, like, okay, we need to make sure that we get at least, you can set quotas. We need a certain amount in this bucket, and we need a certain amount in this bucket. Again, that can kind of go into that pricing, but just I just wanted to kind of talk about that audience piece more. I typically say anywhere between 150 and 500, depending on your goals, is enough though for a B2B audience.
Yeah, I mean, that's usually the first thing somebody asks, right? When they see the research. How many people, companies did you actually ask?
Yeah, so typically you're not asking by company, you're asking by an individual in the company. So it's possible that you would have more than one person at one company responding, but these are anonymous. You want to ask your surveys anonymously so that you'll get valid data. If people feel like you know who they are, they're probably not going to respond honestly. So can't kind of really correlate that way.
Yeah, yeah, and and that's I've been looking at a couple of research recently, and just before our conversation, I was looking at the recent drift research, and it's it's the first thing that you say into the intro, like how many people did you interview, right? Because people say if it's around 50, maybe it's not that relevant, but then when you say up to 500, that actually means something, right? And when you say that you got a couple of tires in it, and by demographics, by different things, then you actually got the real insights that you can use, and it's trustful in that way.
Yeah, I do. There is something interesting though that, people do think like the larger sample size means it's more valid or trustful. And that really isn't always the case. In fact, if you like we typically when I'm doing these, I'll do a soft launch and we pause at 10% and we look at the data and just kind of make sure like, does everything look right? Is there any reason somebody would be misinterpreting a survey question? Do we need to adjust the survey question? Like we just kind of look at all of that to make sure. But almost always the trends that you see in the first 10% of responses you're getting will be the same trends that you see after you've gathered 50 or 500. And I was reading this book called How to Measure Anything. And in there, the data scientist who wrote it was essentially saying there's a rule of five. If you get 5 people, you probably have a trend with 5. So I do think, that's kind of one of those like myths out there, is that it does require a large sample size to really validate a trend. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. Now, is that perception out there, and do you need to meet it to a certain level? Yes, so that part is true.
Yeah, I think that's how we root it, right? The people, and we look at the things. Oh, the bigger the better. In sample size, that many companies, and but usually it is the thing you said. Like if you have the right people answering right from the very beginning, you will see where the research will go. Perfect. Okay, so I have a question which is not related maybe to the research, but
Uh-huh.
what's next for you? What's next in the future?
I've been, content into research and broadening, kind of being able to do this end-to-end research offering about 5 years ago. So I've just been building my agency that way. And for me in the future, what really excites me is just the ways that I can kind of expand what you do with the research. So I've been looking at, like different software where like maybe, I can integrate like anonymous video clips, that if people are willing to kind of give like video clips and things, because I'm always thinking about how it translates out to the content. I'm thinking, how cool would that be? Obviously, everybody's not going to do that. It'd be an optional thing. But what if 5 people in a survey of 500 did a video clip and we can embed those in the content? Or I'm, currently beta testing with a company, like they have a interactive chatbot, AI generative chatbot that can go on the website with clients' research, where people can come to the website and actually type in their own questions. And, so it's kind of like doing the cross tabbing behind the scenes, and they can ask whatever question they want to ask, like, out of the IT managers at companies of X and X size, who said this to this, question. So for me, that's what's next, is just kind of seeing how we can like expand the value and engagement with the research.
Nice, nice. I love that. And where can people find more information about you? Okay, obviously LinkedIn. So maybe we can
Yes.
tell them the website, and if you have other addresses when they can go.
Yeah, I'm active on LinkedIn, and then redpointcontent.com is my website address, and you can go there as well. And I'm not really on other, have a Twitter or X account, but I focus my time and energy on LinkedIn. So that's the best place to find me.
Yeah, same. I hope you're not like me. I'm cursing in Serbian and talking about basketball and NBA on X or Twitter. However do we call it? But
I'm pretty inactive, so I'm like, just go to LinkedIn. That's where I am.
yeah, but listen, that also gets clients, which is kind of interesting. I ask, "Yeah, how did you find out about me?" And then he says, on Twitter. And I'm like, oh no, knowing what I'm doing there. And he says, but you being a partisan fan, that's like the number one thing that we actually consider talking with you. Right? So I said,
Yeah, I was
okay,
to say, at the end of the day, every relationship you have with your clients is a human relationship, and so when you
exactly.
can have some connection and build that relationship that way, I think that's great. That's awesome.
Exactly. I say the same. Becky, thanks again for being here, for talking and sharing insights and nuances. And thank you for correcting my view on some of those things. Guys, make sure to follow Becky on LinkedIn. Check out the website. We'll link it into the description. And as I always say at the end, go back to the beginning of the episode, listen to everything, stop when you feel that you need to get an explanation on something, maybe reach out to her to ask. I'm sure she'll respond on LinkedIn. As I always say, try to say maybe you came from the Funky Marketing Podcast. Nobody does that, but maybe we will have the first person. And as I always say for the end, keep it funky. I mean, always have that funky way of looking into things, which is nobody else does, but you do because you know your customers. Bye bye, guys.
I thanks so much.